Welcome to the hangout. I'm Mark Upton, and with me, as usual, is Al Smith. We're from My Fastest Mile, and today we're having a chat with Mark O'Sullivan. Mark, I'll let you give a bit of background about yourself, and maybe at the same time start to talk about a bit about your coaching journey, and how, certainly from reading your blog, how you start to look at maybe the theory and research and combine that with your practical applied experience and sort of where that's taken you.
Okay. My name is Mark O'Sullivan. I'm from Cork City in Ireland. Been living in Stockholm, Sweden for about 20 years now. At the moment I am working with a person you met when you were over here 2 weeks ago, Dennis 14, at a club called Elfreux. You were there recently doing a workshop. I also work with another club in Gede and a smaller local club called Jarlaby, and I'm a coach for the Swedish Football Association's new coach education plan. I work in the Stockholm district. Journey's been right. It's been quite random, I guess. I played a lot of sports as a child: Gaelic football, hurling, soccer, rugby. Managed to play at pretty much the top level in Ireland, and then the second tier football. Went to university and studied. When I moved to Sweden, I hadn't actually been really involved in sport that much, although most of my time was consumed watching soccer on TV, I guess. Mainly involved actually in music, and I remember it was about 2006. I was playing at a festival in Roskilde in Denmark, DJing, actually, believe it or not, techno and house. And I was being interviewed on Argentinian TV, and they asked me about music question, and I started asking them instead, why did the Argentinian coach take off with a kill with 20 minutes left in the quarterfinals of the World Cup against Germany when they had control of the game? And it was that was when a light bulb went off my head, and maybe I should start getting back into my first love, which is soccer, football, whatever you call it. We call it soccer in Ireland because it's Gaelic football. I started getting involved with some local teams through a friend, coaching, and I think around 2009 I took my first actual coach education course, introduction, and in 2013 I qualified with my UEFA A license. But there was a kind of a parallel journey going on, because I had some ideas about coaching, about learning. I didn't know, and I had a lot of difficulty, I believe, in explaining them to myself, no mind to other people. So this actually led to a lot of frustration for me, which obviously comes out in many different ways. So I set up this blog as a kind of something that I guess represents my journey and inner journey, or whatever you want to call it, into my education process, self-education, self-learning. And I seeked contact with people who I guess were more how would I put this? More educated in the science of sport, the science of learning. Quote Isaac Newton, I did indeed stand on the shoulders of giants to see a little bit further, and my blog has been very much the driving force of my own personal education.
And what do you think drove, I guess, that curiosity, or what was the stimulus for you to go and seek out, I guess, people from a different field, if you like, outside of football, and certainly not the traditional approaches? Where did that come from with you? Was it from how you've been for a while, or is it something specific?
I think I've always been like that, and I guess that's where the frustration comes from. I've always been interested in music, always been interested in art, always been interested in creativity, and I think that I get that from my father. It was interesting, my father was here recently, and he coached my youth football team as a child for about 4 or 5 years, and I had to remind him that, that 5 of the players you coached, of the 16 you coached, actually played top level football in Ireland. And he was like, oh, I never thought of that. It's funny, at a time when all I hear about is coaches saying that, oh, I coach this player and I coach that player. It's my I think that I get a lot from my father. He had such a simple way of looking at sport and kids and learning, and always had a great understanding for that and patience. And also his artistic side, being a very talented painter and musician. I think it's kind of this necessity to be curious and creative. I tend to get bored sometimes very easily too.
It's been interesting. I've been thinking and having a few discussions lately about, I guess, a diversity of experiences as a coach, and whether that actually helps you as coaching. And we often talk about specialisation and the danger of that for players, but actually also, is there a need for more diversity in coaching in terms of where you pull ideas from and having a variety of experiences? And are we a threat of, now we're moving into a cycle where you just play the game potentially full time if we're talking about professional level, and then you come to coaching the game full time if you're an ex-player, and you've had a very narrow range of life experiences to then draw on?
Yeah, I actually was head of a youth centre for 3 years here in Stockholm, and I think I learned as much there as I did through my blog and through meeting people like yourself and speaking to people like Richard Bailey, Dr. Martin Tom, Jean Cote, and Celso Borges, who played in the World Cup for Costa Rica, my good friend Hanno Kerr, who plays with AIK and has played in La Liga. I think working with children between 13 and 19 and running a youth centre for 3 years in Stockholm has given me an incredible insight. And also actually an even bigger insight into adults and how we really try to conform young creative people into a system. I guess I think most of the problems I have with adults, I think.
Mark, I think a really interesting thing for me there is what you described earlier on, is that you still went through that systemic coach education process. And I'm curious on two fronts what you got from that, because it sounds like most of your learnings come from life experience.
Yeah, I think I went through university with a degree in computer science and economics, and maybe it was just a challenge of doing computer science and economics, which I had absolutely no interest in. That I don't know. It's very hard. I guess that I understood my parallel journey was as important, if not more important, actually, than my coach education. But having a UEFA A license does maybe add some meat to the bones. That's kind of important. I think that I think a lot of my doing the education courses in Sweden, I actually must admit that I found them also quite helpful, even though I would question some of the material. And I think I found many of the instructors quite open for discussion. And the best learning, I think, was done particularly in the A license among the coaches when we sat and spoke. But having said that, I'm now an instructor for the new coach education courses, which is a far better course. I think they've restructured and redone the whole player education plan, coach education plan.
You mentioned some names earlier from, I guess, the academic world in sport, talent development, skill acquisition. So what's been, I guess, what are your reflections on, first of all, trying to understand some of that theory and research and not only apply it, but compare to what you actually see out in your coaching environment? So how have you found, I mean, that's often the criticism is that gap between the theory and the actually applied nature of it. And does it hold up from what you've deliberately applied? Does it hold up? So whether that's self-determination theory or when we talk about perception, action, coupling and those things, what are your thoughts on that?
I think I can put it like this. It wasn't until recently I realized that my father and another gentleman that coached our team with him as children, his name was Philly Burke. I never knew if they were any good as coaches. I had no idea. And it's not until the last few years where actually they were quite brilliant. Because they never really forced in too much instruction on us. Everything and this might sound quite bizarre now, when there is a big movement back to more game-based coaching for children, everything was the game. That was it. Game, 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 game. Nothing else. And at the end, then they would have some funny competition to end off training. We were 10-year-olds laughing and playing, and they had to chase us off the field at the end to get us home. And mainly just by giving us what we needed and wanted, I guess, created this desire to continue playing after.
Mm.
And what was the glue that sticks the player to the development plan, or their development? And he said, fun and autonomy. Very simple. And I guess that's what my father and Philly Burke gave us as children. And in some ways, I'm kind of trying to transfer that into my coaching. It sounds very simple. It's not that they just threw a ball in. They didn't do that. They, you know, any coaching tips were extremely brief, and it was maybe they were ahead of their time. It was Twitter constraints on coaching, like 140 characters with the maximum. I don't know, but it's funny reflecting on it now how really good they were, without knowing it themselves probably either. And even when I stay watching I went to a football game with my father recently here, and it's amazing. He says things about 10 seconds before I say them because he's just seen it 10 seconds earlier.
Yeah.
It's quite, I think he's aware of this.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, speaking with you, we've had conversations about how children learn and skill acquisition and the technique versus game-based debate and all of this. And again, it's funny when you, I think with my blog, what I'm trying to do is translate the science and the words that many people might find hard to understand, might be afraid of when they first approach it, and translate it into a word that a coach can explain. It's like, you know, you can't have an expert fitness coach using aerobic and anaerobic to a young coach who's working with a team because he doesn't understand the words of what they mean. So you try to transfer the science into words that as many people as possible can understand.
Yeah. And it's definitely a gap that needs filling, and I guess we've probably both played a little bit of that role, haven't we? Because for various reasons, in the academic world, there's not the motivators or the reward even sometimes to actually do that translation. So it's, you know, how many papers do you get published? Which journal do they get published in? That's what gets recognised and rewarded. I
was asked a question: how do we introduce young kids to the game? Now we're talking about soccer, of course. And I said, as a coach, he goes, yeah, well, maybe it's just better to shut up and let them introduce themselves to the game. And, you know, it sounds simple, but it kind of is, really, you know.
Yeah.
I get really despondent when I see, like, 6-year-olds standing by cones being drilled to do certain things.
Yeah.
And
I think
we've spoken about this a lot.
Yeah, that thinking, if we want to, I guess, draw that analogy back to the theory, I think closely aligns with this idea of affordances. So if we create affordances in the environment, the kids will introduce themselves to it. So if we take the example of the playground, there's various affordances from the monkey bars to the slippery dip to ropes, etc., etc. They're all opportunities for kids to act and learn about that environment and interact with it. Yeah. And I think that's what you said.
Learning spaces.
Sorry.
Learning space.
Exactly, the learning space, and that allows them to introduce themselves. So the role of the coach in a football or a sport context is to start to design these affordances and design that learning space for them.
Yeah, it's a big challenge. I think this actually is a bigger challenge, as Al said. I know recently on Twitter. It's this way of working with young players and children is actually a much bigger challenge for a coach than much of the traditional way. So we work.
Yeah, I think with that in mind, Mark, I'm really interested in whether you feel that the journey you've gone on was an experience journey that you just had to go through, or whether there are things that other young coaches could experience. What is the learning environment we could shape for young coaches that would better enable them to go on that journey? Or do you just have to live it and develop, and is it always going to take that amount of time?
I think it takes a massive amount of reflection. We don't just have to not teach, or maybe help our young players to learn how to learn. We also have to probably help our coaches learn how to learn. And I think I try to do that in my coach education courses always, because I've through the years, by giving answering my questions, I've got extra ammunition to take with me into the coaching courses, and I try to bring that up as well. And so if you're working on a very simply, like I'm going to be doing a course on Sunday now, and it's for kids working between 7 and 10, and a very simple thing and something they really appreciate is when, if you're doing a certain training exercises, just ask them, okay, how do you make this easier? How do you make it harder? Just ask them that and see, let them debate. It's just simple stuff like that. Give them a bit of power over determining, wow, I can do this with the space. I can do this with the amount of players. Can I change the rule of this exercise? Of course, and just ask them, how do you do this harder? How do you make it easier? How can you change it into an attacking drill? How can you change it into this? Just asking them questions, getting them to reflect.
Yeah, we talk about creating representative environments for players learning, but from what you've just said there, it sounds like a similar principle for coaches learning as well. We need to create representative environments, i.e. their actual coaching environment, rather than dragging them into the classroom or decontextualising it so much. And if we can support, exactly the same way we talk with players, if we can support in that contextualised, situated experience, then perhaps that's one of the more effective ways to develop coaches.
I'd like to run an interesting thing by you guys. It was something that I found really, really interesting. Was I had two academy coaches from La Liga Club in Espanyol here last week. We had 62 kids, and it seemed the whole theme for the week was really interesting. All they wanted was to focus on the decision. Do get the decision. Let's see if you can make the best decision possible. Don't care about the technique. That will come. Videotape some of the games after, and show situations where great decision, but you know yourself, this didn't work out technique, but that will come. That was really interesting to get the kids discussing, and they got kids discussing this. I just thought it was an interesting way of working. Of course, they work with the technical and tactical as compatible pairs, but they really wanted the kids to work on the decisions for the whole week. I thought that was great. It was a very inspiring week of coaching.
And how did they what did they do, I guess, to work on that decision making? What was their method with that? Was it a lot of instruction? Was it manipulate, task constraint?
Game. This is how the game goes. This is a rule. Play. And then, kind of like how I work actually, but then they would wait for the game to evolve, and of course mistakes will happen, things will happen, and they give it time and just kind of nudge it in the right direction subtly without giving too many answers, really, or any answers actually. But they would step in and they'd ask, hey, that was a great decision. Why did you think that? That was wonderful. And it was really good. They were showing, and it was very impressive because in the week they were working with some 12-year-olds about a defense, the goal, the ball, and the opponent, and it's fascinating watching 12-year-olds reflecting in that afterwards when they watch a film of it.
Yeah.
We moved over, but we moved over too far.
Yeah.
And they were going, brilliant, and just very interesting. I thought way of working.
And
though it's with film, but very much the children were just deciding the theme.
That's what I was going to say in terms of that climate, I guess almost that safe climate as well. Like it sounds like if the kids in that looking at the video were prepared to offer up their opinions, it sounds like they're creating a very safe environment.
Yeah, it freaked them out the first 2 days, but then by the Thursday and Friday they were really getting into it.
Yeah.
And they realized that any mistake on film was more about part of learning. Yeah. That's it. It was create a very relaxed atmosphere. They delivered it in a way that it was relaxed. I think it was very impressive.
Yeah.
And I think this is good.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think
focusing on decisions.
And the beauty of that, of course, is I bet you can't imagine the same level of engagement coming from videoing and reflecting and reviewing a set of drills.
No. Yeah, I understand.
And of course, you've created a safe space, but what you've done is put a huge amount of pressure in it because the decision is in the moment. The focus on decision making means there's a situational pressure and there's a time pressure, and you have to act.
Yeah.
And you never have that in a drill.
No, exactly. I've kind of mentioned this in my blog where you refer to that. Many traditional drills, the decisions are all decided by the rules of the drill.
Yeah.
It's a journey, and it's ongoing, and it's fascinating, and you learn every week. And Mark occasionally sends me bits of science that I have to get a dictionary out and and look up words and translate them so normal people can understand.
Someone's got to do it.
Yeah, I know. I think that's something we should really be thinking about more, actually. I think when working with coaches, that there is a big divide between the science and coaching, because I think the choice of words. What do you think of the language thing and the language divide between science and the actual coach and player in sport?
I think it's a fascinating one. I think it's beholden on the scientists to do most of that translating. If scientists can't turn their insights into language that you understand, then there's no business being in front of you.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think this is what Fred was talking about.
Sorry, mate. Al and I have had that discussion a little bit. There's also alternative views, which I'm still not clear in my mind, that suggest if you're not willing to open up and learn new language, you're not actually willing to learn. Because language is often a very powerful driver of how you see the world and the lens you look through. So there's also been made to say that actually you need to embrace a different language to genuinely see things differently. So I think there's an argument both sides for that.
But when you're working with parents that are just coaching, they have families, they have jobs, they have the 9 to 5, whatever, they're given their extra time, free to work with children. I think in that case we must deliver it to them in an appropriate manner.
Yeah, exactly, and again that's relevant to the context you're in, and so I was talking about so sort of scaling the language there, and I think that not the problem, but where there's so much scope for improvement is for a parent, some simple tips that can help them fine, but I think the bar needs to be raised massively for professional full-time.
I agree. I think
is way too he's too low basically. And there's so much scope to it, and raised expectations.
I can agree with that. I think.
But I think the important thing that sits around all of that is whichever language we find common currency with. If we're really going to embrace the complexity of human development, we've got to, and that's why I love your describing your artistic background, Mark, and of course being an Irishman, you'll relate to this very well, that I think we've got to really embrace the concept of storytelling as a way of communicating this important stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
The story is where the richness and the complexity of context comes to bear, and really that's probably one of the hardest skills that a coach needs to develop, and possibly why it takes so long to become expert / excellent at coaching, is learning how to tell great stories.
I totally agree with you. It's very that is very important, and I guess children also, they love stories, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably a good thing to finish on. We could probably explore it in a future recording, Mark. So thanks for your time today.
No problem.
And I think we've probably got plenty more to talk about in the future. So look forward to it.
Yeah, let's do this again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks,
No problem.
Right.